She smirks at the judge. A smile, even. Like she's waiting for a dentist appointment, not a murder verdict that will decide if she ever sees freedom again. Bianca Ellis is 32 years old, diagnosed with schizophrenia 13 years earlier, and she's convinced herself the insanity defense will work. Her lawyers paint her as a victim of schizophrenia and a broken mental health system that failed her in her most vulnerable moments. Auditory hallucinations, they claim. Voices commanding her to kill. She couldn't control her actions. The defense is working. The judge is listening, seemingly convinced. But then the prosecution plays the security footage. 3 different cameras, 3 different stores, all tracking Ellis's movements in the hour before the murder. And everything changes. 911, what is your emergency? There's a child. He's bleeding all over the place. We're at North Olmsted Giant Eagle. We're in the parking lot right now. Is the child conscious and breathing? What you're about to see is the moment Bianca Ellis realizes her mental illness won't excuse what she's done. The moment she understands she's not going home. Not in a few weeks. Not ever. A mother was viciously stabbed in the shoulder. Her 3-year-old son was stabbed to death. And the proof of what really happened that afternoon in North Olmsted, Ohio, was captured on security cameras from 3 different stores. This is the chilling case of the woman who stole butcher knives from a thrift store and used them to murder a child in broad daylight. Every single detail has been verified through court records, police body camera footage, and trial testimony. What happened on June 3rd? Your 2024 will challenge everything you think you know about mental illness, criminal responsibility, and how surveillance footage can track a killer's every move before they strike. It started as an ordinary Monday afternoon, June 3rd, 2024, North Olmsted, Ohio. 38-year-old Margot Wood and her son Julian had planned a simple grocery trip. Julian's grandmother and little sister were supposed to join them, but the little girl fell asleep. The grandmother stayed home. Just Margot and 3-year-old Julian headed out that afternoon. They had no idea they just made the deadliest decision of their lives, because someone else was already hunting that afternoon. Someone who'd been planning this for hours. Someone who'd traveled across the parking lot complex, store to store, searching for the perfect weapon, the perfect victim. And keep this detail in mind. It becomes critical later. Margot drove to a shopping center where multiple stores shared a parking lot. The Giant Eagle grocery store, Volunteers of America thrift shop, big lots, all within walking distance of each other. She and Julian walked into the Giant Eagle. That afternoon, Julian sat in the shopping cart seat. They started picking out groceries. Julian picked out flowers for his mother inside the store. A normal afternoon in every possible way. But across the parking lot, inside the Volunteers of America thrift store, something was already in motion. A woman walked through the entrance. Security footage captured her movements. She walked past the clothing racks, past the shoes, past the books and household items, and headed straight to the back, to the kitchen section. There, and she stopped in front of a display of cooking knives. She picked up 2 butcher knives, both 8 to 10 inches long. Broad stainless steel blades designed for cutting meat. She tested the weight, made sure she had a good grip. Then she walked straight past the checkout counter without paying. Theft. But that would be the least of her crimes that day. The woman walked out of the thrift store with large knives in both hands, blades exposed, no attempt to hide them. Just walking through a public parking lot with murder weapons in broad daylight. She crossed the parking lot, entered big lots. Security cameras tracked her every step. She lingered for around 30 seconds, knife in hand. Nobody noticed. Nobody stopped her. Then she stepped back outside. She raised one knife and brought it down hard against the concrete. She examined it. And the blade wouldn't do. She dropped that knife right there on the pavement, kept walking with the other one knife left, one target in mind. Her next stop was the Giant Eagle. the same store where Margot and Julian were shopping. But here's what destroys the defense's claim that she was in a psychotic state. The woman entered the Giant Eagle. She walked past multiple shoppers. Security footage shows she made eye contact with at least 4 people. According to witness statements, she adjusted her grip on the knife, moved with purpose through the store, not wandering, not confused, searching. And then she saw them, Margot and Julian, mother and son in the store. The security footage shows what happened next. The woman stopped, watched them, then began following. She stayed several feet back and tracked their movements as they finished shopping. When they turned toward the checkout lanes, she walked in front, let herself reach the exit first, and waited. Think about that for a moment. Not random violence, not a psychotic episode, calculated stalking. Margot paid for her groceries, loaded them into the cart. Julian still sat in the seat. They headed toward the exit. The woman followed behind them. Then they reached the parking lot. What happened there would become the most damaging evidence against Ellis. Margot pushed the shopping cart toward their car. The woman stepped out and started running at them from behind. Knife raised above her head, stabbing wildly at the air as she charged. Margot heard footsteps, turned, saw a woman with a knife sprinting directly at her son. Every motherly instinct kicked in. She grabbed the cart. I tried to push it away from the attacker, tried to shield Julian with her body. The attacker lunged. The knife came down. Margot shoved the cart. The blade missed Julian but stabbed into the rear of their car. Margot screamed, tried to pull the cart away. The attacker yanked the knife free and came at them again. Margot pushed the cart down, threw herself over Julian, tried to cover him completely. The woman stabbed down. Julian was struck in the face and back. According to medical testimony, the injuries were severe and life-threatening. Margot was still trying to shield her son. The attacker stabbed her in the shoulder. Multiple people witnessed the attack. Someone called 911 immediately. Others were too shocked to even move. But not the attacker. She just walked away. Blood-soaked knife still in her hand. Calm expression on her face. Like nothing had happened. 911? What is your emergency? There's a child. He's bleeding all over the place. We're at North Olmsted Giant Eagle. I don't know what happened to him. What exactly is going on? There's a kid. He's bleeding all over the place. We're at Giant Eagle. He's outside. We're in the parking lot right now. Is the child conscious and breathing? I don't know. But they're doing CPR on him. They're doing CPR. Yes, right now. Police arrived within minutes. Found the woman less than a block away. She was sitting on a curb. The knife lay on the ground beside her. Officers drew their weapons, ordered her to the ground. She complied without resistance. Didn't speak, didn't struggle. Remember that security footage from earlier? Here's why it mattered to prosecutors. Back at the Giant Eagle parking lot, paramedics were working on Margot and Julian. Margot was conscious and calling for her son. The shoulder wound required immediate medical attention. Julian had sustained critical injuries. Paramedics rushed both to the hospital. Doctors treated Margot's shoulder wound successfully, but Julian's injuries were too severe. Despite medical efforts, Julian Wood died at the hospital. A 3-year-old boy murdered in a grocery store parking lot while shopping with his mother. The attacker's name was Bianca Ellis, 32 years old, diagnosed with schizophrenia 13 years earlier, and her history with law enforcement painted a disturbing picture that prosecutors would use to build their case. In May 2023, Ellis was arrested for stealing $100 worth of items from a store, and she pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of unauthorized use of property, got 6 months probation, was required to complete a theft education program. She never showed up, not once. A warrant was issued for her arrest. She disappeared, January 2024. Ellis appeared in Bakersfield, California. She attacked hospital staff and refused to leave. Police arrested her. According to court documents, she told officers she wanted to do something that would keep her in jail for at least 2 weeks. She never explained why. Then, in February 2024, Ellis was back in Cleveland, staying at a homeless shelter. She told other residents she wanted to kill someone and eat them too. Police placed her in a psychiatric unit. She assaulted the hospital staff there. Somehow she was released anyway. But what the defense didn't know yet was how much evidence prosecutors had gathered about Ellis's behavior in the weeks before the murder. May 2024. Ellis traveled to Kissimmee, Florida, showed up at the Saratoga Hotel. She'd purchased tickets online but had no money to pay for her room. She refused to leave. Body cam footage captures what happened next. "What's your name?" "Bianca. What's going on tonight?" "I was wanting to get a room for tonight." "Why?" "Because I am." "You have no reason. You just want to?" "I have nowhere else to go." "Are you refusing to leave the property?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Because it's cold outside. I don't have nowhere to go." "You have no family?" "Nothing?" "No, I'm not from here. I was just on vacation." She got arrested, spent a month in jail, was released on May 25th, 2024. 4 days later, on Thursday, and May 29th, she got arrested again. Someone had seen her in a wheelchair, made a distress call. "Are you okay though? Somebody called because they were concerned about you?" "Yeah, I kind of get lightheaded from my medicine." "Are you feeling all right?" "No, but I think the temperature's getting to be just right." But when officers arrived, they found from her ID that she hadn't completed the theft education program. There was an arrest warrant for that. "All right, Bianca. You know you got warrants, girl." "Yeah, so we gotta check on those." "All right. You got anything crazy on you? No guns, knives, drugs, bombs, nothing like that?" She was freed at an unspecified time, Monday afternoon, June 3rd, 2024. She was back at the North Olmsted police station, still in the wheelchair, when she'd gotten arrested. The cops had taken some of her stuff, she claimed. Of course, that never happened. She was promptly sent on her way, angry as she was. From there, her next stop was the Volunteers of America thrift store. Minutes later, she began walking toward the grocery store, abandoning her wheelchair along the way. That afternoon, she murdered Julian Wood. Think about that timeline for a moment. According to court records, Ellis had been diagnosed with schizophrenia in 2011. She was supposed to take medication daily. She hadn't been compliant for months before the murder. In the space of 9 years, Ellis had been hospitalized approximately 13 times for mental health issues. She'd received treatment at the Murtis Taylor Community Mental Health Center since February 2023. Medical records showed Ellis had a history of hearing voices, and some told her to jump off buildings. In February 2024, she was admitted to a hospital where she made bizarre statements about everything from purity to NASA, espionage, and even dinosaurs. The first time she was hospitalized was in November 2015, when her mother admitted her for not taking medication. Ellis was having suicidal ideations, as well as delusions about being raped and impregnated. From then until 2021, she'd been hospitalized 3 times for being off medication. Then in February 2024, she was placed on psychiatric hold after calling the police and asking to be arrested for a murder conspiracy. She kept hallucinating and talking about the murder of El Chapo and the Mafia. Ellis had been receiving Social Security disability benefits for her schizophrenia since 2017. Instead of using that money for housing and treatment, Ellis would cash these checks and travel. She moved between California and Ohio multiple times, had multiple run-ins with police where each time she kept asking to be jailed. But here's what prosecutors would use to demolish the insanity defense at trial. In the months before the attack, Ellis's life had become increasingly chaotic. She'd been evicted from a Rocky River apartment in January 2024. From then on, she spent the first half of the year traveling between Cleveland, California, New Mexico, and Florida, often seeking to be arrested and detained. After the warrant incident and her release, Ellis was homeless. She had no money, was sleeping near the downtown Cleveland casino that weekend. She was not on her medication during all this time. For the 6 to 8 months before the murder, not a single family member had heard from her. And Ellis believed she'd been raped and impregnated during this time. What happened to the child, she never said. But there were other children, 23 of them actually, whom she was thoroughly convinced she'd had when she was only in kindergarten. Ellis had committed a very great evil, but this was obviously a very troubled individual at the same time. Still, a 3-year-old had been murdered in cold blood. His mother would carry a physical scar and forever have emotional wounds that would very likely never go away. There had to be repercussions. Justice had to be served. Her first court appearance happened at Rocky River Municipal Court. She wouldn't say anything. Ellis also would not raise her head up when the judge spoke to her, nor when her bond was set at $1 million. Since the case was aggravated murder, and it was bound over to the Cuyahoga County Common Pleas, such felonies require a grand jury indictment. Ellis's irrational behavior continued. In fact, it escalated. When the judge would speak to her, she refused to acknowledge that she was being talked to or even answer any question. "Miss Ellis, why don't you want to answer these questions?" ASAP. By the third time the court tried to restart her arraignment, Ellis said she didn't want it read out to her. And when the judge actually did read it to her, Ellis turned to the camera and started smiling gleefully, like this was some beautiful day. Julian's father, however, had some words. "My name is Jared Wood, father of deceased, husband of Margot. Your Honor, that day, 1 week ago, she took everything from us. There's nothing that could ever replace my son or anything that my wife and I, or even our other kids are going through. It's horrendous, and I really wish no bail period or extend it to the max limit possible that you can. At the very least, just do whatever you can to keep this monster behind bars." Ellis's attitude could not stop what was coming. She got indicted on 9 counts, 1 count of aggravated murder, 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of felonious assault, 1 count of endangering children, 1 count of tampering with evidence, 1 count of misdemeanor theft. But with behavior like this, it was apparent that something was terribly wrong. Between July and September of 2024, she appeared for competency trials. It didn't take the court long to realize this woman was not mentally fit to stand trial. That September, she was taken to the North Coast Behavioral Health Care for treatment. What happened during those months in treatment would become crucial to the prosecution's case. It wasn't until early 2025 that she finally became well enough to be back in court. This time, with the use of adequate medication, Ellis was now stable enough to answer questions, realized that what she'd done was wrong, and could communicate with her legal team. The trial began in October 2025. According to her lawyers, Ellis said she heard auditory hallucinations that day. There were voices in her head commanding her to kill. According to statements from her defense counsel, she'd said, "My mind went blank. I just decided to follow them. Maybe this isn't going to happen. I thought it was over. It wouldn't give me a second chance. My mind took over my body and just did what it wanted to do." The voices in her head had been very specific. "Someone has to die. They need to be killed. You could either kill them or kill yourself. You know what you came here to do? Go ahead and do it." It was apparent that the defense wasn't disputing whether Ellis had murdered Julian or not. They were pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. However, the prosecution thought otherwise. Then the prosecution revealed its strongest evidence. They pointed to Ellis's intent. The fact that she'd stood at the knife display selecting knives, thrown one away because it wasn't good enough, stalked her victims around the store, then waited for them outside. Someone who could put this much planning into a murder clearly knew what they were doing was wrong. The security footage began playing. But first camera, Volunteers of America thrift store. Ellis walking through the aisles, stopping at the knife display, examining each one carefully, selecting 2 specific knives, not random, deliberate selection. Second camera, Ellis leaving without paying, walking across the parking lot, entering Big Lots, testing the knife against concrete, deciding it wasn't good enough, dropping it, keeping the better one. Not psychotic confusion, rational decision-making. Third camera, giant eagle interior, Ellis entering, looking around, spotting Margot and Julian, beginning to follow them, maintaining distance, not random violence, calculated stalking. Fourth camera, Ellis passing them in the store, reaching the exit first, positioning herself to wait. Not impulsive, premeditated. Remember those knives Ellis selected so carefully? Now the jury understood why she'd been so particular. She needed them to kill. That theft from the thrift store wasn't random desperation. It was the beginning of a murder plan. Those 30 seconds in Big Lots testing her weapon to make sure it would work. Walking ahead to the exit, cutting off escape routes. All of it showed intent, showed planning, showed someone who understood exactly what they were doing. The defense called their expert witness, a psychiatrist who'd worked with Ellis. He testified about the severity of her schizophrenia, the frequency of her hallucinations, how commands from voices can feel impossible to resist. But the prosecution had its own expert, a court-appointed psychiatrist who'd evaluated Ellis. According to court testimony, this statement from the psychiatrist was the final nail in the coffin. The expert testified that while Ellis suffered from schizophrenia, her actions that day showed goal-directed behavior. She understood right from wrong during the attack. She made deliberate choices. It's my opinion with reasonable medical certainty that the defendant had the severe mental disease of schizophrenia at the time of the June 3, 2024 offense. It's my opinion with reasonable medical certainty, however, that the defendant did not have a severe mental disease or defect at the time of the June 3, 2024 offense that caused her to not know the wrongfulness of the offenses. So despite having schizophrenia, it did not cause her to not know the wrongfulness of the offenses. She told me when I interviewed her on June 12th of this year that her rage caused the stabbings. Yeah, she felt rage and blanked out because before the offense she was hot, dehydrated, had slept outside the previous night, had not eaten that day, and was worried about not having money and being unable to pay her rent. Anger and rage or anger control problems and rage are not symptoms of schizophrenia. The prosecution also had that courtroom footage, the one from Ellis's arraignment, when she turned to the camera and smiled while murder charges were being read. They played it for the jury. Ellis sitting calmly, turning deliberately to face the camera. That smile spreading across her face while the judge listed how she'd stabbed a 3-year-old to death. The defense claimed mental illness. The evidence showed intent. The defense said she couldn't control herself. The security footage showed careful planning. And the defense argued she was in a psychotic state. The psychiatrist testified she understood her actions. The defense pointed to years of untreated schizophrenia. The prosecution showed footage of Ellis selecting murder weapons like someone shopping for groceries. Earlier, we saw her test that knife against concrete. Now we understand why that mattered. She was making sure it was strong enough to kill. That moment she walked ahead of Margot and Julian to the exit, she was cutting off their escape route. All of it showed one thing. Ellis knew what she was doing. Eventually, Ellis seemed to have made a turnaround in her disposition toward the case and what she'd done. I apologize. But it was too little and far too late. The jury deliberated. When they returned, the verdict was clear. Guilty on all counts except the tampering with evidence charge, which had been dismissed. The other counts still remained. The judge's mind was made up. On the 27th of October, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bianca Ellis sits in a cell at the Ohio Reformatory for Women tonight. Not in a homeless shelter, not traveling between states, not sitting in a wheelchair asking police to arrest her. In a cell for the rest of her life. Her attorneys have filed an appeal arguing that her severe untreated schizophrenia wasn't adequately considered during sentencing. that someone with her level of mental illness cannot form the intent required for aggravated murder. The appeal also challenges whether the jury instructions properly explained the insanity defense standard. But those security camera recordings that tracked her movements through 3 different stores that afternoon remain the central evidence in her conviction. And they tell a story that contradicts every claim the defense made. They show a woman walking through a thrift store, not confused, not wandering, walking directly to the knife display. They show her examining knives carefully, selecting 2, testing their weight, making sure she had a good grip. They show her leaving without paying, walking across a parking lot with blades exposed, testing one knife against concrete, deciding it wasn't good enough, keeping the better one. They show her entering a grocery store, making eye contact with shoppers, adjusting her grip on the knife, spotting a mother and child, beginning to follow them. They show her maintaining distance, tracking their movements, walking ahead of them to the exit, positioning herself to wait. They show planning, intent, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Julian Wood was 3 years old. He went to the grocery store with his mother on an ordinary Monday afternoon. He picked out flowers for her inside the store. He sat in the shopping cart seat. He had no idea that someone had been following them through the aisles, that someone had positioned herself at the exit, that someone was waiting with a knife. His mother tried to save him, threw herself over him, took a knife wound to her shoulder trying to shield his body. But she couldn't stop what happened. Julian died at the hospital, his injuries too severe. His life ended by a woman who'd spent the afternoon selecting the perfect weapon, testing it to make sure it would work, and stalking her victims through a store and waiting for them in a parking lot. The defense claimed Bianca Ellis heard voices commanding her to kill, that she couldn't control her actions, that her untreated schizophrenia made her unable to understand right from wrong. But the security footage told a different story, a story of careful selection, deliberate planning, calculated stalking, rational decision-making at every step. The jury saw that footage. They heard the expert testimony. They learned about Ellis's history of seeking to be arrested, her pattern of asking police to jail her multiple hospitalizations, her refusal to take medication, her travels across the country, and they made their decision. Guilty. Not because they didn't believe Ellis had schizophrenia. The medical evidence was clear. She did. But because the security footage showed something the defense couldn't explain away. Ellis knew what she was doing. She selected knives carefully. She tested one to make sure it would work. She stalked her victims. She positioned herself to wait. She cut off their escape. All of it showed intent. All of it showed planning. All of it showed someone who understood exactly what they were doing and chose to do it anyway. The smile Ellis gave the camera during her arraignment. That moment when the judge was reading murder charges and she turned to face the camera with a gleeful expression. That wasn't psychosis. That was someone who knew exactly where she was and what was happening. Someone who found it amusing. The prosecution played that footage for the jury, and it destroyed any remaining claim that Ellis didn't understand the wrongfulness of her actions. Bianca Ellis will spend the rest of her life in prison. The appeal is pending. The arguments about mental illness and intent will continue. But the verdict stands. Life without parole. Julian Wood's father stood in that courtroom and called Ellis a monster, asked the judge to keep her behind bars, said she took everything from his family, and the judge agreed. Because 3 security cameras tracked a killer's movements through 3 stores that afternoon, and they showed planning, intent, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Mental illness doesn't excuse murder. It explains behavior. It provides context. It demands compassion and treatment, but it doesn't erase intent. It doesn't eliminate responsibility. And when security cameras show someone carefully selecting weapons, testing them, stalking victims, and cutting off escape routes, no amount of hallucinations can explain that away. Bianca Ellis murdered Julian Wood. The evidence is overwhelming. The security footage is irrefutable. And justice, however delayed by competency evaluations and treatment, has finally arrived.